And it's truly an honor tonight to welcome our guest speaker, a visionary who has reshaped the discourse of contemporary architecture, Bjarke Ingels. And I just can't resist. It's such a big turnout for a big lecture. Sorry, I just had to do that. His work challenges conventions, not just in form and function, but in how we conceive of architecture's role in shaping the future. Bjarke Ingels is the founder and creative partner of Bjarke Ingels Group, BIG, a firm that has become synonymous with innovation, sustainability, and playfulness. He has redefined what it means to be an architect in the 21st century, embracing a multidisciplinary approach that seamlessly blends landscape, engineering, architecture, planning, and product design. And I find the name that he calls this really interesting too. It's called Big Leap, L-E-A-P. His philosophy, rooted in what he calls hedonistic sustainability, insists that sustainability should not be about sacrifice, but about enhancing human life through creative and responsible design. His architectural journey began under the mentorship of Rem Koolhaas at OMA in Rotterdam, but his ambition to chart his own path led him to co-found Plot in 2001, quickly gaining recognition for the VM houses in Copenhagen. By 2006, he had established BIG, a practice that would go on to shape global urbanism with projects that span cultural institutions, infrastructure, sustainable cities, and even extraterrestrial habitats. BIG's projects are rooted in an acute understanding of contemporary life. Its economic, technological, and cultural complexities, they weave different things together to form really beautiful buildings. From the Woven City in Japan, a prototype for the future of urban living, to the Jalapu Mindfulness City in Bhutan, a visionary experiment in sustainable urbanism inspired by the Buddhist principles. His work consistently demonstrates a radical optimism about architecture's potential. Few architects would propose a power plant that doubles as a ski slope, but Copenhill in Copenhagen exemplifies his belief that infrastructure should serve more than its primary function. It should inspire, engage, and also elevate the human experience. In 2016, Bjarke was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people, with Rem Koolhaas describing him as, quote, the first major architect who disconnected the profession completely from angst, unquote. Serpentine Gallery director Hans Obrist put it more simply, quote, Bjarke has never shielded away from big topics of architecture, of society, of life. I guess that's why he's called the practice BIG. Securing Bjarke's presence here tonight was no small feat. It all started in Milan during Salone Design Week last year, where through a combination of strategic persuasion and a few well-planted fermented drinks, we convinced him to join us. And I remember that was the afternoon that we also ran into Winka. These days, he spends much of his time focusing on his 6-year-old son and the 1-year-old son, and perhaps that too has shaped the trajectory of his practice towards projects that emphasize longevity, cultural continuity, and human-centered urbanism. His work is not just about design buildings. It is about shaping the future. Whether it is a new cultural institution, a reimagined airport, or the first lunar habitat in collaboration with NASA, his architecture tells a story of possibility. His projects reflect a belief that architecture can and should address the grand challenges of our time, from climate resilience to social equity, from technological innovation to cultural preservation. Tonight we have the rare opportunity to hear from Bjarke himself, a man whose work is redefining architecture's role in society. Please join me in welcoming Bjarke.
Fantastic thank you so much for the very generous and entertaining introduction. I think if I would stop now, it would already be a very good lecture. From now on, it's all downhill. Yeah, because I had a nice long drive from New York, which is my home during the school year, and kind of rearranged the entire talk to be about a few things that have been taking up a lot of my sort of energy and passion and focus lately. But maybe firstly a little bit about myself. This is my other home in Copenhagen. I live in a Norwegian ferry, a car ferry, where the cars would go on and drive through, and I just put a glass facade so you have a loft, and you look over at the Queen's Palace, now the King's Palace. It's essentially a piece of decommissioned infrastructure that has now become the home of my family in Copenhagen. When I spent 3 months of summer on the houseboat, and I sit here where cars used to park, and I look out. I see the sun setting over the King's Palace, and in the morning I see the sun rising over Copenhagen, the waste-to-energy power plant that we built, which makes me feel like a very significant citizen in Copenhagen. And Copenhagen is, as Rosanna mentioned, a sort of a waste-to-energy power plant that is so clean that the steam coming out of the chimney is cleaner than the air of Copenhagen. So we have been able to turn its facade into the tallest man-made climbing wall in the world. You need to be a pretty skilled climber. You can also ride the elevator inside and admire all the technology that scrubs the particles from the air and get to the roof, which is a man-made mountain meadow where you can hike and downhill ski. Denmark got 0 medals in Sochi and in Beijing. I hope eventually we can change that statistic now that the Copenhageners can practice at home. And then it's really a sort of a substantial, you see this Copenhagen, and this is my home. And it's really sort of a substantial part of the landscape of Copenhagen, and I like this idea that one of the 2 main landmarks of Copenhagen, the Little Mermaid, and the other one is a facility that turns the waste of the society into clean energy and district heating, and that you can hike and ski on. And it's sort of part of this idea that Rosanna also mentioned that we call hedonistic sustainability. Essentially that the sustainable city or the sustainable building is not only better for the environment, it can also be much more enjoyable for the people that live in it. And it's an idea we stumbled upon with our first project a quarter of a century ago. We opened the Copenhagen Harbour Bath, and on the opening day we saw like the citizens of Copenhagen jumping into the water in the middle of the city. They didn't have to drive their cars for hours to get to the Hamptons. They could actually jump in the port in the middle of the city. And we designed the harbour bath in Aarhus. And it became clear that a clean port is not only nice for the fish, it's also amazing for the citizens of that city. And it became this idea of hedonistic sustainability that we've been pursuing in various ways ever since. But today, when I was preparing, I was like, what are the things I would like to talk about? And one of the things that have been occupying me a lot lately is that last year, in the heat of the moment, around the same time maybe after the same 2 or 3 Negronis in Milan. I actually in Milan met with the director of Domus, who suggested invited me to become the guest editor of Domus for the year of 2025. Domus is a 98-year-old, I'm sure most of you know it, but just in case, 98 years old, almost like cultural institution from Italy, Architecture, Design and Art magazine. Gio Ponti was a very famous, very significant, impactful editor of it for years. My first thought was, I don't have time for this. Like, who does? But then he told me that Norman Foster was currently the guest editor. Before him, it was Charleville, and before him, it was Tadarando. Then I thought, okay, maybe I'll recheck my schedule. And we had to come up with a kind of manifesto or a theme for the year. And the first thing that came to mind was this idea of the oxymoron. I thought to write the oxymoronic manifesto, because increasingly, I think not only in our own work, I think just like hedonistic sustainability, and oxymoron, again, I'm sure most of you know the term. When I heard it for the first time, I had to look it up. But it's essentially, a concept or a phenomenon that consists of seemingly mutually exclusive or contradictory elements. Like hedonistic sustainability, most people would see it as opposite sides of the spectrum, but they can actually be two sides of the same coin. Pragmatic utopia, another sort of concept that we often work with. Social infrastructure, the idea that a power plant can actually serve a social purpose in the city that it's part of. And I think more importantly, I was beginning to feel that the world has become so fragmented, cancel culture, the idea that critical conversation was becoming impossible because you couldn't really have a conversation with someone from the other side. And when you look at almost any subject, if you distribute any population according to any criteria, the typical graph that will emerge is a bell curve. And that's because along like whatever parameter it is, the majority will somehow be somewhere in the middle, and then you end up having fewer and fewer in the extremes, which is the opposite of the polarized worldview where you are either with us or against us. You are either the good guys or the bad guys. Most people actually have a little bit of both sides, and I think one of the main reasons that the Democrats lost this presidential election is because it had become so fundamentalist. You could not discuss anything with someone who didn't agree with you, not just on 80%, but everybody had to agree 100%, and if not, they were Nazis. And in that sense, I thought politically, socially, culturally, and aesthetically, architecturally, artistically, the oxymoron could be an interesting point of view. But then, of course, I realized we had to edit 10 magazines in a year. And I could just see myself spending every living, breathing moment of 2025 coming up with new ways to unfold oxymorons in architecture. So I decided to choose a simpler, more straightforward theme, rooted in another aspect that has been occupying a lot of my life and a big part of my company's economy, is that we last year opened a building we designed ourselves on the tip of the port of Copenhagen, in the industrial port of Copenhagen, right across from the container terminal. We managed to get our hands on this tiny little wedge-shaped piece of land where we could build our Copenhagen offices. And it was like an exercise in big leap, because not only are we the landscape architects, engineers, architects, product designers, and planners of the project, we are also the tenants, developers, contractors, and financiers of the project. And the learning curve has been pretty steep. Like after a year of designing the East and West, we decided to split the partner group up in two. One was the client group, including our CEO, Sheila, who has a background in economics. And the other group was the architects working for the clients. We somehow needed that split internally, otherwise it was mayhem. But the building, of course, is part of the industrial port of Copenhagen. That's becoming a new part of the city. Around it, we designed a park, a public park, so that you can say that the building really sits where the city ends, and it's the park. You know, it's the building is built, as you can see, mostly out of concrete. I'll get into the materials, but we're using something called a double T beam, or a TT deck. It's this quite refined industrial product. Where it's simply the most economically and materially efficient way to make a very long span. It's a pre-tensioned, prefabricated concrete beam. You have it in warehouses. All IKEAs in Denmark are made with these TT decks. We use them as park benches on the urban side. The entire ground is covered in sand, and we only have plants that are indigenous to the coastal landscapes of Denmark. So you have this it really feels like the end of the city. You can see that the building is made out of these very large, 60-foot long, 12-foot tall concrete beams that are the height of a room or a wall. When they touch the ground, they are actually sort of inviting. So every beam becomes a bench when it hits the ground, or it's an opening where you can look into the restaurant on the ground floor, our foyer. You can see this kind of informal ground cover of sand, and it's raw, sort of almost industrial, sort of harbor tectonic. It's actually a very inviting and engaging building. So it's made in this kind of almost like checker of these 60 by 12 foot beams that can accommodate like incredibly generous spans because of the beam height. That's an entire room. And then on the outside, almost like a Danish harbor equivalent of a Soho fire stair, every floor is directly connected to the outside, of course on the ground to the park, but on the higher levels to a terrace. And that terrace is connected to the terrace above and the terrace below. So we actually eliminate one of the egress stairs, taking valuable space from the inside of the building and putting it on the outside of the building, but also making a building that actually is inviting. You can walk, and people from the neighborhood come and they climb the building, and they end up sometimes on our roof terrace, which is fine. Eventually, sometimes we need it ourselves, but it somehow makes it part of the urban space. And inside, we try to imagine what kind of a work environment would we like to have. And we came from a large Carlsberg factory, a beautiful space, tall ceilings and one level. Of course, here we have a footprint of less than 10,000 square feet. So we would have to be at least on 5 levels, but we decided to make it 7 levels, and then each floor has a third or half open space, so open to the floor above or the floor below. So throughout the entire space, you can always see your colleagues beneath you and above you. Of course, because you don't like a good sort of environmental performing envelope in Scandinavia would be roughly 40% transparent, 60% opaque, to not have excessive heat loss or thermal heat gain in the summer. So normally that becomes like this kind of like diffusion dither of open and closed small little windows. So here you have these 60-foot long panoramas, and then you have 60 feet of pin-up space, except maybe that one. And it gives you these, as you travel up through the building, you get these incredibly framed views of different scenes from the city, like here, looking at the windmills and the bridge to Sweden. And you can see the kind of diagonal of the terraces traveling up along the building. Because we have the floor plan is 120 by 120 feet, and then because it's wedge-shaped, one of the facades is only 60. But that meant that the diagonal spans, some of them are more than 120 feet. So, and because we were helping, like typically when you make a commercial floor plate, you have a like leasable area, and then you put a core in the middle, and the core contains two egress stairs or three. That contains the elevators, the bathrooms, the technical spaces, and then you kind of wrap the space around it. So even if you have the whole floor, the floor plan is a kind of a donut where you have to chase around this kind of central box to find your colleagues. So in this case, we said one of the egress stairs, we put it on the outside, which is part of the terrace. This kind of Soho fire stair here. The other one goes into this north wall. We have a fat wall to the north where we have all the meeting rooms, like the workshop, the kitchen for the restaurant, the technical rooms, all the storage in this kind of big wooden shelf, and all the bathrooms, and the elevator. And then the entire floor plan is open, which is why we end up with this enormous span. So in the end, it became quite clear there was a lot of money to be saved and quite a bit of steel and in the concrete if we would place one column. And we had fought so hard to have a columnless space. So in the end, we thought, okay, it would be like irresponsible economically and ecologically not to have one column. So we thought, let's celebrate the column. And actually stone is like the way you make concrete. It's a funny story. You take a limestone, then you grind it and pulverize it, and then you burn it, and then you sort of, it becomes cement, and you mix that with like other stones and aggregates and some steel, and then you end up with a material that has 20% of the load-bearing capability of the original stone. So stone in itself is an incredibly strong material. So, and when you just quarry it raw, it's not that expensive. It's only when it becomes like a highly manufactured veneer. So we ended up having this kind of stone column in the middle of the building, and it's essentially Scandinavian granite on the lower levels where you have the most loads. So this is a Boulder Norwegian black granite. It's an insanely dense and strong granite. And then as you travel up through the building, it becomes eventually marbles and from Sweden and Norway. Like Denmark has no bedrock. And then finally at the very top floor, it's a Carrara marble that you make statues from. But essentially it becomes this little presence of nature in this kind of otherwise very industrial building. As you can see also, all the stairs and guardrails are made out of hot-rolled steel. And you could say there's almost like this fatwa against paint and drywall in the building. That every material is what it is, chosen for what it's good at. So the building becomes this constellation of materials that have color and texture and tectonic evidence of the different processes that are used to manipulate it and process it. And the journey up through the building, you also always have the north wall, which is the wooden shelves with all the support functions. And you end up with these kind of framed views of the surrounding city, where you can see that you are in a living, breathing, dynamic space of a port. And of course the warmth of the shelf as this kind of continuous element to the north, where you have all the cold light, you have the warm material. You can see the model workshop. It's probably one of the nicest model workshops at least in Denmark. Sometimes you find them in the basement. Here it has sea views, the container port, and finally on the roof. Originally, I was planning to live here in the penthouse. My girlfriend hated the idea of living on top of the work. She may have had a point, but when she saw it finished, she probably regretted. So instead, it's now a space we keep for special projects or special happenings. We try to not just plaster it with desk. And since we are an architecture school, another little nerdy detail. Normally, you would prioritize level-free access to the outside, but because we are hitting the maximum envelope, we actually decided to keep it simple. So we put all the insulation on top, which means that you have a window still the height of a lazy bench that you walk into, and also it's a bookshelf underneath. And then when you come outside, we only had the height for insulation, so we wanted a garden. We had to make these kind of islands or mounts to have enough soil for the trees. So the way to, instead of planters, we spoke with a guy who, the woodchuck, I guess he is, to cut the trees on an angle. So you end up with this kind of organic, almost like blurry edge, and you have this almost like a little archipelago of two islands in a sea of timber, like a Scandinavian Chinese garden. So all of this just to say that it was quite clear that when we were the clients, we didn't have to satisfy a market demand, we didn't have to satisfy like expectations from developers or investors. We could make all the choices. And at some point I started thinking maybe we had gone too far, but I think now that and actually when it was announced that we got the building permit, or like we actually worked with the city to get the building permit, then when it had to go to vote in the City Hall of Copenhagen, and a conservative politician decided to undermine the project, and he made an interview with the newspaper calling it a historically ugly building. And at some point I started, maybe in the absence of a client to tether us, we had somehow lost connection to humanity. But also, after it opened, it was also awarded the best building in Copenhagen the same year. So it is, and it has also been awarded the ugliest building in Denmark. So a lot of awards. But I think one of the things about the building was this kind of commitment to material. So I thought maybe an interesting theme could be materialism, and maybe it was possible to recapture materialism from the kind of negative connotation it has today of being associated with empty consumerism, and maybe shift the perspective towards looking at human society and looking at how human society has been shaped by the materials we've known to harvest and manipulate to create the framework for the life we want to live. And as a result, I wrote this materialist manifesto. So the first issue that came in December, where we were introduced as the guest editors, I wrote a manifesto, the materialist manifesto, and we had to make a poster on the other side according to the tradition. And I worked with a good friend of mine, Andrew Zuckerman, who's also shooting all the covers. And he actually had a sort of an ancient hand axe. It's the oldest material, oldest tool known to man. A hand axe. It's roughly the size and shape of a computer mouse, and it's the first tool we had. It's a single material manipulated with the same material, made in order to kill animals, like butcher an animal, break the bones, etc. And it's somehow a testament to the journey that was unleashed when we acquired our first ability to harvest materials, manipulate them, and start giving form to the world around us. And as a little experiment, I will now read the Materialist Manifesto. I'm beginning to realize that we might not have time for more than this part in the lecture, but it's a short manifesto, and I'll read it quickly. And just a full disclosure, I'm not trying to look cool, but my reading glasses have shades. I turned 50 recently, and I was a bit self-conscious about needing glasses, so I thought if there were shades, it would make me look cool. But now I have to explain. Life is animated matter. Life on Earth has evolved through adaptation. Life adapted to our material environment. Until the moment we discovered tools, technology, and architecture, then we acquired the power to adapt our material environment to life. We no longer had to hide in a cave to seek shelter from the elements. We could cut, carve, and stack rocks to create our own cave. And suddenly we had to ask ourselves, what kind of a cave do we want to live in? Through those questions and their answers, we have adapted the surface of our planet to the needs and desires of human life. The Danish word for design is Formgivning, which literally means form giving, because to design something is to give form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, to give form to the future. Because when we design an artifact, a space or a place, we're giving form to the world that we would like to find ourselves living in the future. You can look at the evolution of human history as a tale shaped by the materials we've known how to harvest and process, as evidenced in how we name the epochs of human history, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. Our capacity to manipulate matter is perhaps the greatest force driving the development of our culture. The world of the Anthropocene is formed in the shape of our human ideals and dreams. In the mindset of Paul Virilio, you can view cities as temporary decelerations of matter at the intersections of the constant material flow of people and goods. The orchestration of that material flow is our art form. When asked to formulate a manifesto as guest editor for Domus 2025, I felt, rather than forcing the many voices of artists and architects into the ideological straitjacket of my own set of values, what if we shifted the lens from idealism to materialism? By reclaiming the term materialism from the realm of empty consumerism, we aim to bring it back to the practice of formulating our future through form and matter. We want to go on an odyssey through the material world, starting with solid rock and ending with the flow of electrons. Stone, earth, concrete, metal, glass, wood, fabric, plastic, plant, resource, and immaterial. We hope to return to the fundamental material nature of what we do. Unlike other art forms, architecture is not about representation, but accommodation. It doesn't refer to life, but makes space for it. It doesn't discuss the world, but produces it. Architecture is essentially all the immaterial processes of society solidified in physical form. Our focus on material allows us to manifest radically different worldviews side by side without distinction or discrimination. Like an editorial oxymoron, the Materialist Manifesto strives to allow seemingly mutually exclusive voices to be heard through the tectonic possibilities of each respective material. Every project becomes a literal material manifestation of contradictory discourse. In a time where polarizations threatens to silence critical conversation through isolation or cancellation, the Materialist Manifesto can serve as the substrate for truly diverse dialogue. Our material odyssey will make space for collisions of clashing worldviews. So on the pages of Domus, you will find side by side the traditionalist and the avant-garde, craftsmen and technophiles, the ornamental and the austere, the expressive and the tectonic, the global and the local, the pragmatic and the utopian. Conflicting ideas united by matter. So, essentially, and I realize this is a huge advertising for Domus, but it's more like, essentially the year will be a journey through stone, earth, concrete, metal, glass, wood, fabric and plastics, plant, and then resource, the idea that sometimes we mine the built environment to make new built environment, and the material. We thought it would be strange and anachronistic to make a whole season without touching on AI at any point. And maybe just as a teaser, it was like, and it's kind of funny, like I was speaking with Winka before, that maybe also the fact that I think if I would have been given a guest editorship when I was in my 30s, I would have tried to put my own projects into every issue. But I think the fact that I'm now at this next stage in life, it has been such a joy to look out into the world, and as we always do, and actually sort of identify things that captivate us. You know, like so the issue has like this kind of genealogy of the use of stone to some of the most interesting current uses of stone, and map of the world seen through the lens of stone, and a kind of library of the different stones and the different characters. And there's an article by Guter Perenidis, who commissions stone artworks as a genre. One of my good friends, Billy Quasing, the head of the Geological Institute in Denmark, writes about rock dust and its capacity to be potentially the most straightforward answer to the infertility of agricultural lands in Africa, as well as potentially the greatest cure against global warming. Steve Webb, the engineer, talks about the use of structural stone in contemporary construction. I went to visit Amin Taha and group work. This is incredible practice in the UK. That the Clerkenwell building, which is also their offices, has a load-bearing structural stone facade, and they're basically rediscovering stone as an almost carbon-free. If it's locally harvested and you use electrically powered machines to harvest it, it has almost no carbon footprint. I went to visit the construction site of Scala Familia, which is, of course, the oldest building, but still under construction. And today they're using pre-tensioned solid stone as construction. During the 70s, there was a moment where they built with concrete. It's one of them. It's definitely the most beautiful construction site I've ever been to in my life. This French architect Rotterdam, who built in a kind of classic modernist vocabulary, but using solid stone as the load-bearing material. Stone Matters, a Palestinian group that uses solid stone, and the use of Jerusalem stone that they believe have become a political element in Israel and the West Bank and Gaza. And again, it's like looking at using sophisticated technology and radically different geometries to use stone instead of steel or concrete. A Polish graveyard made with stone bricks, a beautiful square in Italy, and two contrasting projects. One that sort of takes advantage of the raw, sort of unformed nature of the material, and the other one that uses sophisticated technology to create this kind of incredibly organic, almost like Art Nouveau. And we commissioned 10 photo essays by Laurent Guénitou, the photographer, who in this case documented the journey of the pink marble for the Perelman Performing Arts Center for Rex. This is my old friend and colleague Joshua Remus from Rex, contemplating. When I saw his facade, I said he managed to turn his OCD into a creative outlet. But essentially, the stone has been harvested. It's cut so thinly. It's then photographed with the front light and backlit. It's then sort of organized into these patterns, which is where the OCD becomes handy. It's then sort of laminated between layers of glass. It's then laid out in panels. It's then sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and driven into Manhattan and is now a spectacular, a beautiful little building between the legs of the World Trade Center towers. Sabine Marcellus and Solid Nature, their use of dye in various kinds of quartz and using sort of stone, this kind of ancient material as almost like a pop contrast with the poppy colors. Surface design, the kind of contrast of lightness and heaviness. Persomen, a Finnish artist and designer, using Carrara marble. And Nigel Stein, a Dutch Lebanese artist that makes these incredibly free-formed objects that look almost like soft. And then finally, and Goldsworthy, a series of stone structures that he sort of converts and reinterprets for a series of artworks, each of them inside an abandoned stone structure. And then Jose Manuel Castro Lopez, a new obsession of mine, a sort of a Spanish artist from Galicia, also where Darwin's mom is from, who's almost like some kind of crossbreed between Isamu Noguchi and the Salvador Dali. That by looking at the stone and manipulating it, it gets this kind of almost surrealist nature. And finally, of course, since material is the subject and the protagonist, we thought the cover should be a celebration of the material. And as such, we ended up persuading Dobus to make the cover just a photograph of a gorgeous piece of stone. And then in the absence of graphics, the title of the magazine is engraved like the Ten Commandments into the surface of the stone. So this is the first time I'm editing a magazine, so I guess I'm pretty excited about it. So take this as a call for, so if any of you have a project, the ship has already sailed on stone and earth, but concrete is still open, and from then on, so please send it to us. We need you. So I should check the time, actually. When is this supposed to end? All right, okay. So, all right, I know what to do. So maybe back a little bit to some of the work we do. We've never been like very materialistically fundamentalist in our practice, but we in the sort of pursuit of trying to enhance the environmental performance of our buildings. One consistent pursuit lately has been the use of timber, because in the absence, and there's actually all the issues will also talk about the advances using, for instance, like cave bacteria to digest limestone into cement instead of using energy-intensive furnaces. There's a lot of movement happening both in carbon-free steel, carbon-free concrete, etc. But right now, the simplest way to reduce the embodied carbon footprint of your building is to make it out of wood. We built the Plus in Norway, which is the most environmentally friendly factory in the world. We believe we have a claim to. It's made from locally sourced timber, charred on the outside for weather protection. We negotiated with the fire department that we didn't have to cut down more than 15 feet offset around the building, so we can actually use the trees, the evergreen pine trees outside as the sun shading for the facade. So the factory workers are making outdoor furniture for the Vestra furniture company inside a forest. the factory makes woodwork and paint. So the two materials you see is color and timber. And this is not a veneer or a finish. It's the load-bearing walls, the load-bearing columns, the beams, the slab of the roof. So what happens when you build a building out of mass timber is that the bones of the building, the raw structure, some finishes, is already beautiful. The administration is located around the central courtyard, and the building is actually part of the whole factory complex. Is publicly accessible, and you can actually climb the roof and descend into the courtyard and see everything they do inside. They said they're not afraid of industrial espionage, as they say, because if people start copying them, then industry is going to get more clean. The roof is covered by a mixture. The building is heated and cooled with geothermal. It's powered by local hydroelectricity, supplemented by photovoltaics. The roof is covered in locally sourced turf, and we sort of literally moved the ground cover to the roof, including elements that makes it successful as habitat. So it has the same amount of habitat after the building was built as before. Around the corner on the Arctic Circle in the north of Sweden, we built a one-room hotel, or actually should I say a one-room for humans and 350 rooms for birds and bats. It's a tree house, and we worked with a local ornithologist who gave us a perfect index of the different birds and bats that breed in the area, and then gave us the respective designs. There's 17 different kinds of birdhouses for the different birds. So you wake up to the tweeting of birds. You shower with a squirrel, and you are surrounded by nature around you, beneath you, and above you. It's even ADA accessible because we're taking advantage of the slope of the site, so you can just roll into it. So a project like that, of course, it doesn't really make a dent in the global carbon footprint, but maybe this project has more significance in terms of a declaration of love to nature. On the other end of the spectrum, we're just finishing an extension of the Luxembourg airport. These are renders. It's a 900,000 square foot building that's built 80% out of mass timber. For anti-terror purposes, the ground floor had to be concrete, but everything above is timber. But it's this kind of, let's call it 80-20 kind of approach, where timber is great for a lot of things, and again, you have these gorgeous exposed ceilings. The columns are actually timber, but they're just covered by cardboard to protect against the weather. But because you have these long spans over the courtyards, 3 levels that span across a courtyard opening up to the tarmac, some of the members became like too girthy in timber. So they have just been surgically replaced with steel. So you can kind of see that most of it, all of this is timber, but then in the beam, the bottom has a lot of tension, and then you have some of the diagonals, the diagonals that have abundance of tension have simply been replaced. Almost like a pirate with a wooden leg, simply because in that case, steel was better at the job. And I think that approach, this kind of pragmatic approach, actually allows us to make a kind of very large-scale timber building where for necessity, vertical egress cores, ground floor is concrete. A few members have been replaced with steel, and then the rest is essentially an enormous timber structure. And then building on that experience, 2 years ago we won the competition to design the new airport in Zurich, which will be the largest timber structure on planet Earth. I would call it timber brutalism, because everything, it's kind of this kind of heroic space frame girdle that you walk through as you travel through the terminal. The dimensions are almost 3 by 3 feet, locally sourced pine, And the only thing that isn't timber is the control tower that stands like a campanile in the middle of this kind of three-dimensional space where all the different flows of people pass each other in 3 dimensions. And the control tower actually lifts up the skylight. So the skylight becomes the control tower. And the roof is covered in photovoltaics, powering 2/3 of the airport. And of course, as an architect, you're always nervous. What vicious nicknames are they going to come up with your building? But in this case, it's the espresso coffee pot, which I think is nice if you like coffee. And in this case, you saw the photovoltaics on the roof, which I think is to find ways to integrate active power production as an element of the project is a challenge that I think as architects we should take on our shoulders, to find aesthetic ways that these kind of environmentally performing elements don't just become some sophisticated machinery on a technical roof. They actually become integrated in the energy performance, but also the kind of aesthetic performance of the building. For Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, we're designing the student campus center that just topped out, which is essentially a series of timber tables with photovoltaics on top, climbing a 4-story hill. So it's a 4-story building where every level is directly connected to the outside. So you can sort of enter it from any angle, from any elevation. And inside, the timber not only dramatically reduces the embodied carbon footprint of the building, but also becomes this kind of beautiful, light, almost like cozy environment, even if everything you see is actually the load-bearing structure. There is no material finish applied. Everything is hard-working pieces of timber. For Google, we created a few pavilions for their headquarters in Mountain View. The landscape, the beautiful landscape, when you look closer, it's actually a series of root zone gardens. So all the wastewater, all the rainwater that falls on the building is captured and used to irrigate the landscape. And all the black and gray wastewater from the building goes through these root zone gardens before it's let clean into the San Francisco Bay. The roofs are covered in photovoltaic panels. The Googlers call them dragon scales. But essentially the entire material of the building is actually converting photons to energy, except all the clear stories. The structure, the steel structure, it's a grid shell that has a catenary curve, because the catenary curve is the most materially efficient way to deliver a long span with a minimal use of material. That's why the roof can be so incredibly thin. It's basically just the insulation. And the smiles, these kind of clear stories, are proportioned to bring in the perfect amount of daylight for this kind of marketplace for engineering and creativity. And maybe lastly, around the corner in Vegas, and you wouldn't normally associate Vegas with environmental performance. Although Vegas, we learned, basically they have an abundance of solar energy with solar farms in the desert, and then of course they have the Hoover Dam. So our original idea was to cover the entire, this is our proposal for the Vegas A's, the baseball team that used to be the Oakland A's, now moving to Vegas. We actually spent 5 years of our careers designing their headquarters, like their ballpark in Oakland. And after 5 years, they couldn't reach an agreement with the city and moved to Vegas. It has to be enclosed, so we designed it like this kind of arched dome, so you get height for the baseball, you get these kind of materially elegant spans. To the south, it's entirely opaque. To the east and west as well, and only to the north. You have these kind of arched pennants or ribbons that open up to the north, allowing daylight, cool daylight to come in, allowing views from the strip. You have MGM, Excalibur, and Hotel New York, New York, that can actually see the energy on the field. And from the inside, you get this kind of enormous framed view where the energy from the strip can come in and sort of be part of the experience inside. So somehow the architecture, I like to say that it looks like the sphere swallowed the Sydney Opera. The architecture is essentially designed to keep the relationship with the environment, get the daylight in, but sort of omit all of the thermal exposure and glare. And the last one is for the European Commission. We're designing, as part of the new European Bauhaus, the kind of environmental agenda of the EU and the built environment. We're designing the Joint Research Center for Environmental Construction in Sevilla. Sevilla is the sunniest and warmest city in Europe. It's half public square, half European Commission. So it's essentially this cloud of shading pavilions that shade an outdoor square, naturally ventilated, water elements to provide evaporative cooling. But it allows us to make the entire facade transparent because the square is already shaded. There's an abundance of daylight, but no direct solar exposure and glare. So you can actually see what the commissioners are doing inside. You get enjoyable outdoor spaces. And as a result, the building produces twice as much power as it consumes. So it's actually part of the energy utility company of the city. And a year ago, I had the honor to speak at the Vatican as part of a European engagement with the Vatican. And Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU, met with the Pope. And if you ever get invited to visit the Pope, and you wonder what to give him, he already has a framed photo of the Joint Research Center. I'm not a Catholic, but if I was, this could be my ticket to go to heaven. And maybe I'm going to spend 10 more minutes, or maybe 15, if that's okay. Because I'll skip a few things. But maybe just like, this is me together with all of the richest people in Denmark, which is the family that makes Lego. And because we designed their headquarters. And it's essentially the Lego Experience House. And we tried to sort of capture a building that was as inclusive and as inviting as Lego is itself. So the roof is an interconnected playground. You can enter without a ticket. The building is open in all directions. You can walk on the Lego square where light seeps in between the galleries above, again without a ticket. And only when you enter the actual exhibits do you need a ticket, but there it might be the only museum on Earth where you are encouraged to touch all the artifacts. And I think that leads a little bit to this kind of idea of form giving form to the future. That Lego is not a tool, or it's not a toy, it's a tool that empowers the child to create his or her own world, and then to inhabit that world through play and invite her friends in joining her in cohabiting and co-creating that world. And that's essentially the power we have as architects. And of course you can see that power, and like you see the notion of future means also like we're involved in with ICON and NASA. We're looking at laser sintering moon dust into a sort of lunar obsidian. Moon dust melted into glass to create the habitat for the first 4 astronauts to have a permanent base on the moon. But maybe since we did mention a little bit. The sunshades on again. There was a little bit of mention of Bhutan. I had no idea how long this talk was. I never spoke about domes before. That's like a whole lecture on its own mind. But you know, there's a few cool projects in here. But maybe fast forward to I think these two make sense. These are the two last ones, I swear. This is actually Toyota, the president of Toyota. And in 2019, I met him and he told me that Toyota used to be a loom maker. And then when the automobile, they became so good at making large machines that when the automobile became a phenomenon, they became the largest automaker in the world. They were the first producer of mass-produced hybrid cars. And he had realized that it was time to pivot again. They could not just be a car maker, they had to become a provider of mobility as a service. And he wanted a living laboratory for urban mobility. And we worked with him to study the city. And today the city tries to do everything so it becomes good at nothing because everything is dominated by cars. So we thought, what if you have three kinds of streets? Streets with autonomous cars and pedestrians, like on the street, promenades for personal mobility and pedestrians, and parks where you can only walk. And then we take these three kinds of streets and we weave them together in two directions. So you create a city fabric where you can get from anywhere to anywhere in a driverless car, on an e-scooter or a bike, or walking through a park. And of course, we try to use environmentally performing materials, photovoltaics. We capture geothermal energy. It's close to Mount Fuji, so there's volcanic activity in the ground. And in this space, Toyota can work with their collaborators in different technologies to orchestrate and experiment with the complex interactions of different kinds of movement. There's fuel cell technology with hydrogen. There's a Matternet where goods are delivered straight into the homes. The homes have domestic robotics of various kinds, beautiful views of Mount Fuji. And what I like about the project is that we got commissioned by a car maker to imagine the city of the future, and the result ended up being a city where we take 2/3 of the right-of-way that is normally surrendered to the automobile, and we open it up for more interesting forms of life, not only urban life, but also plant life and animal life. So we presented this project to the world after a year of collaboration in January 2020. And of course then COVID came, so I couldn't travel to Japan for a year and a half. But we broke ground and phase one just recently opened. The first couple of city blocks. We designed the entire public realm, and we're designing some of the buildings for phase two. Even though it's called a city, woven city, it is more like a neighborhood. But last year, like a year and a half ago, I was invited to a dinner in Copenhagen in the honor of the King of Bhutan. And I ended up sitting next to him, and he said that he was at the coronation of King Charles, and he said he just swung by Copenhagen because he actually wanted to speak with me about a project he was looking into. So he invited me to come to Bhutan because he wanted to create a new city. Bhutan is famous for its gross national happiness. It's a tiny country, less than 1 million inhabitants, surrounded by China on one side and India on the other side. They are experiencing, despite all of their successes as a country, they're experiencing a sort of brain drain that a lot of the younger generation is going to Australia primarily and Canada to pursue economic prosperity. I went to Bhutan, traveled around, and Bhutan is, on the surface, very different from Denmark. It's the most mountainous country in the world. Denmark is entirely flat. It's more like an archipelago. The two countries have the same size, and Denmark often ranks highly on on surveys of self-reported happiness, normally competing with the Finns, ironically, as Finns don't come across as particularly cheerful. In Bhutan, they measure their success as a nation in gross national happiness. We're both powered by renewable energy, windmills, and hydroelectricity in Bhutan. Of course, like the main landmark of Bhutan is the tiger's nest. And what we found is a country that's incredibly green. 60% of its forests are obeying international legislation. It's covered by 80% forest, 9 national reserves. It's powered by all the rivers, the abundance of rivers that not only power the cities, but also bring fertile land to the agriculture. Well-being is such a high priority in the country. It's big into the gross national happiness index. And it's very safe. The trusted political system, the respected monarchy, good foreign policies and peaceful geopolitical relationships with the neighbors makes it a very safe and trustworthy place. So we thought, since they are already measuring gross national happiness in these 9 parameters that are all based on Vajrayana Buddhist principles, we thought, why don't we take these 9 parameters, 9 principles, and bake it into the design principles of the city. So the mindfulness city is a city that is shaped by the nature and the rivers that surround it, and rooted in the local traditions and wisdom. It enhances agriculture and nature rather than displacing it. It is powered by the flow of the rivers. It is embracing collaboration and togetherness. And it is designed to attract foreign investment and retain local talent. So anchored around 9 main economic activities. Spirituality, it's the only Vajrayana Buddhist country in the world. Tibet as well, but Tibet is now no longer its own country. Health and wellness, longevity, the mountain air, the beautiful nature, the clean environment, education and knowledge, agro-technology and forestry, green tech and high technology. It's also the 3rd largest national holder of cryptocurrency. They have hydro-powered data centers, which also leads into finance and digital assets, and aviation and logistics as the 9 of the 7 main parameters, but also all the functions that a city needs to sustain these activities. And when you look sort of at the master plan, a major hydro station is going to power the city, also powering data centers, the water storage for floating PVs, then health and wellness neighborhoods in the highlands, taking advantage of the beautiful nature, the tropical landscapes, spiritual clusters, meditation, spirituality, Vajrayana Buddhism, manufacturing, agro-tech, forestry, and then sort of education, financial districts, and finally a dry port with rail to India and an airport connected to the entire world. And you can say Pilefu right now is on the border to India, and you can only reach it with small planes. Once we finish the airport, 5 billion people will have direct flights to Pilefu. You can see it. Bhutan, when you look like this is a map of 5 billion people, and it's kind of sitting smack in the center. Potentially, it could be a gateway to South Asia. The existing airport is the first project that we're taking on and realizing. We're devising this kind of modular architecture so that it doesn't become a Frankenstein like most airports eventually do, but the spirit of the architecture can sort of expand and extend using locally sourced timber and bamboo, and trying to sort of anchor it in the beautiful architecture of Bhutan today. The kind of modularity makes it both industrially manufacturable and also matching the existing crafts. So this is Bhutan. The mindfulness city is 2,500 square kilometers, and the urban areas in the middle are located around the airport. But it's just like the country, it's covered with 80% forest. So we thought maybe since an airport is the first impression you get of a city, to basically bring the forests that come down along the two rivers and bring them into the arrival and the airport itself, also becoming a divider between arrival and departure. You have this kind of shaded arrival square, and you enter inside, and the rainforest courtyard becomes part of the experience. So as you sort of arrive, right, and maybe finally, they still have 8 large craft schools where they educate woodcarvers, painters, stonemasons. So as I've been traveling there, I was there on my 6th trip in a year and a half. Slowly but surely, I've been infected by the kind of beauty of this, and in the end, I realized that we simply had to embrace this craftsmanship, the painted wood structures that you see, and normally I would dismiss it as prestige, but because it's still a living, breathing part of their culture, and I told my team, because we were working on this idea with the kind of formation of pitched roofs, and I told them that we had to do this, and they kept hearing what I was saying, but somehow I think it didn't arrive all the way to the fact that I actually meant it. And finally, so no, we have to. And when we started doing it, in the beginning we were almost giggling. But then I think it has somehow elevated the project to something completely extraordinary, because this is not fake. This is how Bhutan is today. So when you land, not only are you immersed in the nature, but you're also surrounded by all these kind of cultural artifacts and expressions of the city. The lounges are bridging over the rainforest courtyard, and you see the mountains on the horizon. And essentially, arriving, you'll be waiting for your luggage in a jungle. So welcome to a different kind of city. And then, of course, maybe just touching on the highlights of the structure, it became clear to us that this city really has to be shaped by the nature and the landscape it inhabits. So the 34 rivers that flow through the territory ended up defining the city. The rivers are seasonal, so they go substantially up and down, and they are also like ecological corridors, allowing the elephants to migrate into India. So we decided to let the rivers, to protect and preserve the rivers as ecological corridors, so they become like central parks flowing through the city. Then you have these smaller linear parks where you have sort of gravity-assisted natural water management. Each neighborhood becomes like a paddy field cascading down the gently sloping hills, and the city densifies as it approaches India. You have these 3 main transportation corridors for public transportation, and where they cross the rivers, they become bridges, and the bridges become public institutions, so they become a bridge from one side to the other, but also a destination in their own rights. The central area as it stands today, and the kind of future with the expanded airport and the dry port. And you can kind of sense this kind of European scale, maximum building height of 6 to 8 floors, and you can see these kind of local parks and then these kind of major central parks along the main rivers. And then we've been working with different groups of local architects to combine tradition and sort of contemporary design, and highlighting all these sort of locally available materials, including river rocks and bamboo and timber and rammed earth. And then we've been trying to sort of interpret the building traditions of Bhutan and create this kind of catalog from the kind of, let's say, the sort of Calvinist Scandinavian interpretation to a sort of more traditional Bhutanese interpretation, creating a kind of catalog that works for local craft, but is also easily applicable to industrial manufacturing. And then the architecture that you normally associate with Bhutan is actually alpine in nature. So we try to develop the tropical equivalent, because we're down in the lowlands, so it's a completely different climate than most of Bhutan. And sort of develop this typology where you have a naturally ventilated central courtyard and a shaded roof terrace to provide natural ventilation and somehow the tropical equivalent of Bhutanese architecture. And then for every scale, we've sort of developed different building types for apartments. The awnings can serve as terraces, the courtyard typology with the kind of tall stone wall and the kind of light timber on top. So in a way, try to sort of really acknowledge the fact that Bhutan is unique in the sense that it still has a living, breathing tradition for craft and down into the craft of building, a kind of kindergarten under a shaded roof, manufacturing under a ventilated shed, and different kinds of courtyard typologies and single-family homes. So an entire vocabulary to set the tone in the first phases, always using public space as part of programming, always having public spaces on the ground floor, taking advantage of the safe environment. The schools can really use the public space for an extension of teaching, living among agriculture in the highlands, residential neighborhoods, sort of more high-end, along with hospitality and spirituality, meditation centers. It has geothermal activity, so you can have natural hot springs as part of the kind of wellness experience. And we are extending the existing Bhutanese trail of 400 miles of paths with another 400 miles. So you can actually get to all of the high points in the country along this like one pilgrimage. And then just like finally looking at the city fabric, trying to sort of create a city that resolves all of the contemporary and modern demands of a cosmopolitan city, but using different kinds of passive means. We have this kind of network of tram stations, which is where you have the highest density. You have these bioswales that are green in the middle, with the traffic on either side. A typical street. The pavement is always permeable, allowing the tropical rains to seep directly into the ground. One of the existing main streets of the local town, returning into the Royal Boulevard, that becomes a pedestrian space that runs through the entire city and kind of sets the tone in phase one. This is one of the more urban areas. You have 5 tram lines that connect to some of the peaks, the kind of more urban part, the cars in the middle, and then this kind of permeable local streets, more like alleys. And you see traditional and modern architecture completely cohabiting the same space. Water management becomes an incredibly big part of the project. You need to sort of contain the rivers. Not only are they quite seasonal in the water levels, but also elephants are fascinating, but also dangerous. So on one side, the wild, and on the inside, the kind of public programs, including kayaking rivers and places for swimming, so that these kind of major river parks really becomes a major destination for the cultural life of the city. The bioswales that seasonally swallow the tropical rains. And then lastly, this idea that all the bridges, because this city of course has no landmarks and no identity to begin with, we thought since it's shaped by rivers, what if a Weitzman Buddhist center or a healthcare center, a cultural center, ends up not only becoming part of the infrastructure of getting from one side to the other, a marketplace, but also part of the experience of every part of the city being somehow intrinsically connected to the rivers. And of course it will have songs and stupas and temples of traditional Bhutanese urban environment. But we have designed like 3 main public structures: the airport, phase one, a Vajrayana Buddhist center, which is the idea that a lot of people might not feel welcome to enter a temple because they're not practicing Buddhist. They might do the wrong thing. So almost to make a place where foreigners who have an interest in Vajrayana Buddhism can come and experience all the different elements that somehow embodies a contemporary interpretation of all the aspects of Vajrayana Buddhist worship into a contemporary structure. And lastly, the entire city will be powered by a hydro station. And since the water flows from Bhutan to India, we got the idea to make it out of prefabricated concrete elements in the different colors, traditional colors of Bhutan, like a Bhutanese equivalent of an Indian stepwell. So anyone who's migrated to the Hoover Dam and stood at the top and thought, couldn't it be cool to rappel down the face of this? In Bhutan, you can actually descend along the face of the temple dam to the 21st century equivalent of the tiger's nest, which is a temple nested on the face of the dam, almost like a ceremonial procession. There's like thousands of different ways to get down and up again. And in some way, I think it tries to capture all the elements we try to sort of imbue into the mindfulness city, that it turns nature into power, it turns engineering into art, and it turns the infrastructure for energy into an infrastructure for spirituality. So one could hope that maybe the Temple Dam could be for Bhutan what the Eiffel Tower is for France, or the Sydney Opera is for Australia. So maybe sort of to end, we've made a 3-minute film that explains in 3 minutes what I have done in an hour and a half.
In the land of the Thunder Dragon lies a special place where wisdom and compassion have forged a unique way of life. Rooted in the timeless principles of Vajrayana Buddhism, Bhutan seamlessly intertwines spiritual and cultural values with a profound respect for nature. A green sanctuary where national parks and forests absorb more CO2 than the country emits. Bhutan harnesses the power of its rivers, making it one of the cleanest nations in the world. Guided by Buddhist principles and the philosophy of gross national happiness, Bhutan has nurtured a society built on trust and well-being. A safe place, governed by a stable political system dedicated to the country's long-term vision. Today, Bhutan is focused on building its future, ready to emerge as the gateway between South Asia and the world. Rooted in Bhutan's identity and open to international partners, a new city will serve as a hub for global exchange and sustainable development. With a confined footprint of just 4% of the nation, this special administrative region will lay the foundation for future generations, becoming a new model for a lasting legacy. Welcome to Gilefu Mindfulness City. Descending from the Himalayas to the lush tropical plains, a cascade of urban terraces is shaped by the uninterrupted flow of water, plants, and animals. A land where bridges become cultural landmarks, connecting one neighborhood to another. A human-scale environment designed to inspire and nurture global talent, fostering a culture of collaboration, experimentation, and innovation. In Gilefu, green and clean surroundings will drive businesses towards sustainability, striking a balance between economic success and environmental prosperity. Built with locally sourced river stones, timber, and bamboo, the Mindfulness City blends tradition with modernity, preserving heritage while advancing progress and cultivating resilient, self-sustaining communities. Here nature is enhanced rather than displaced, with every path drawing you deeper into the wild. This sanctuary for spiritual and physical rejuvenation evolves with its ever-changing landscape, integrating infrastructure with social activities and nature-based solutions. A constellation of public spaces will gather residents of the mindfulness city to share a life of learning and happiness. In the Rotterdam Buddhist capital of the world, people of all cultures will unite and practice compassion, kindness, and inner peace, revealing Bhutan's greatest teachings. Together, we begin a new era of mindful prosperity.
So we'll open it for questions now. Maybe we take 10 minutes for questions. All the hands are going up. Microphone is being passed around, so let's start right here.
Hello. Okay, great. First off, I want to say thank you for coming. Even if it's at the coercion of one of the greatest Italian cocktails. My question is quite simple. If I could ask you to hold two versions of yourself in this question. The self you are now, and the self when you were starting your career at, say, 25, 26, 28, how would you say your relationship to playfulness has changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always took architecture very seriously. I always took it quite seriously, but I also feel that you know, in the three transformations of Zarathustra, first, what is it? The camel goes into the desert carrying all its values in its hump. Then it transforms into the lion that fights against the dragon of the imperative that says you shall, you must. And then the final transformation, the lion transforms into a child that through play experiments and creates new values, new ideals. Right? So I think that the element of play is fundamental in creativity, and I think it's important to understand. I mean, my oldest son, I called him Darwin, because I think Darwin and his theory of evolution, he somehow found the simplest attainable explanation to the greatest question. You know, where does all of the wonders of the biosphere originate? Is there a divine designer? And I think this idea of evolution, and it's important to understand that in the evolution, because evolution is the product of adaptation through excess and selection. And the excess is because all variation is in a way random. It's the random recombination of maternal and paternal DNA, and it's random mutation through the agency of viruses, for instance, and bad copying. So the creative movement never has purpose, but it's because of, in evolution, like in natural evolution, it's the selection pressures by predator-prey arms race, by the ability to adapt and enjoy an eco-niche, etc., etc., etc. And the same thing happens in a design studio. It doesn't really matter why the idea was proposed, and especially it doesn't matter who proposed it. And I like to say that once in a while I come up with a great idea, and I love it when it happens, but very often it's not me, and it's also not my job. My job is to make sure that when the great idea presents itself, that's the one we pursue regardless of where it came from or who came with it. So in that sense, the element of play has probably always been there as part of the process. But because it is such a fundamental part of the process, and you have to remember that it doesn't really matter why you do it, but it's incredibly important why you chose to pursue it. You don't have to be conscious about why something feels interesting or relevant, but once you double down on it, you need to try to formulate. The funny thing is actually to formulate something is almost a synonym to form-give. Because when you formulate something, you take an intuitive hunch or a feeling or some kind of a precognitive understanding or knowingness, and then by formulating it, like when you formulate something, you hear it for the first time the same time as the people you say it to. But now that you've said it, it now has become formulated. It exists in the world, and it can now travel from one to the other, right? So in that sense, you don't have to be aware of why something feels right or compelling or interesting. But once you double down on it, you then need to become more conscious about why is it that we're really pursuing this.
First of all, thank you for your great presentation. My question is that there is a transition in your projects from buildings with modular cubes into buildings embracing tradition and, I should say, ornaments. So do you think it's like a transition in your architectural approach, or it's just an answer to context?
I mean, definitely the airport of Bhutan. I mean, I think maybe I've just been spending so much time in Bhutan, and I know for sure that we couldn't have done the Bhutan airport 10 years ago. So I think it's a very new chapter that I'm very intrigued by. I'm not sure what it's gonna lead to, and maybe it's just one little naughty deviation. But at least it's almost like understanding the incredible cultural richness of Bhutan and the fact that the culture is still alive and breathing as a rich material resource to tap into. Just like the cobblestone of Domus is a red marinachi. It's almost like a stone made out of stones. It's a kind of sedentary. There's a black marinachi that is made out of, that looks similar, but it's actually meteorites that have bombarded lakes of lava. And the red marinachi is more like a, what do you call it, sedimentary stone, like river rocks that have been collected with a kind of red calcium substrate, and it's kind of metamorphic rock. But just to say that the kind of richness of that stone has an ornamental quality, just like the heritage of wood carvings and paintings in Bhutan has an ornamental quality. And in both cases, we would use it as a material. So that's and I think it's in some way, I think because I turned 50 last year, like when you approach these kind of milestones and it's like half a century, it's probably comfortably over half of your life. You do digest a little bit the fact that this is where you are now. And I had a conversation with the King of Bhutan, and he talked about the 4 quarters of life. He said the first quarter you grow and you evolve and you become who you are. That's roughly when I went to Barcelona to study architecture, and I normally say that I became who I am. That's pretty much when I graduated from architecture school. I was 26 years old. So the second quarter, you become part of a team, you own your craft, you assemble maybe a team, and you find your gift. And the third quarter, which I would say I maybe just started, inshallah, you give to the world the gift you have to give. And I would say, also we had some discussions about certain people who were interested in investing in our company, and then I was thinking, like, I spent 25 years of my life assembling this team. And I think, and also I spent 25 years of my life, like, as an architect in the beginning, no one will entrust you with building anything, because there's the catch-22 that no one will give you any kind of commission until you've already done one of those commissions, right? And then it becomes true, no one will give you an airport until you've already done an airport. So you're constantly trying to get to the table and get to do some of the stuff you can do. And I sort of feel like after 25 years, now I have the team, we're here, we have a platform. Now I can spend the next 25 years essentially giving to the world the gift that I feel that I have to give, like playing with the team that has been assembled. And I think maybe that means a certain openness to experimentation. I mean, I think David Lynch, who just died, has been an incredible experimentation, like an incredible inspiration. And I think it's also kind of clear that he had like some kind of rough moments. David Lynch's Dune was not a great movie. And then he sort of slowly came into it. And then, of course, and I would say, some would say that at some point it tilted. And in Inland Empire was a bit tough to watch. Maybe he became so liberated that he didn't give a shit about what anyone thought. But at least I feel now comfortable and certain that it is our path to try to really engage in this relationship with Bhutan and see where it goes. But I don't think you're going to see a lot of wood-carved ornaments in Soho in our next project. But I could be wrong.
Hi, Mr. Ingels. Thank you for your talk. I have 2 questions. First, can I take a selfie with you? Is that yes or no?
We find each other later.
Gotcha. My second question was, what is your strategy to carrying through and making your vision a reality as an architect and designer?
Yeah, but I don't think I ever had a strategy. I think what happened was I applied for one job in my life, and that was an internship at OMA, and it was someone like Kolas was my favorite architect, favorite thinker. I was expecting people working in that office to be sort of demigods, and I learned a lot there. I got a lot of really good friends. I got a very special friend in the form of Shannon Smith. And after a year and a half, we finished DT, like design development, on the design of the Seattle Public Library, which was the project that I worked on in my time at OMA. And I felt, also when you're 25, the idea of committing 5 years of your life to a single project feels like, quite crazy. So after 2 years, we felt that it was time to try something else, and we didn't want to work for anyone else, so we were somehow out of options. And then, back then, probably still it's possible. I mean, like back then you could register for open competitions, And even back then, this was in 2000, you would get like 300 to 500 submissions to an open competition. So, but miraculously, while funding our 450 square foot apartment, which was where we lived and worked, we taught at the Art Academy in Copenhagen. And after 6 months, we won the first 3 competitions, so we suddenly had money, and we had a building to do. So I think everything we did was like almost that it was almost like grasping at the only thing we could see that was currently possible. And once we got there, like once we won the competition, we had to, and the client freaked out that it was like 2 kids in sneakers and one of them didn't speak Danish that won this project. So we had to somehow fight nails and teeth to not lose the job. They were trying to say, why don't you give it to a serious office and then you can be employed by them. And the day before our first sort of meeting, my phone rings at 10 o'clock. We spent the whole day painting. We rented an office space, so we would have an office. And we didn't have money, so we painted it ourselves. So we came back super tired. We had to go to the first meeting with the client the next day. And I come home. I was living in a shared apartment, and there was a folder from the client, two binders full of technical speak, schedules and budgets and things to respond to. And I was the only one speaking Danish, and I was 26 years old, had no clue about this. And it's 10 o'clock, and the phone rings. And then it's a man, one of my partners today, Bjarke, who's working for the company that got the second prize in the competition. He saw our proposal and was so fascinated, had never heard about Plot, the name of our company, looked me up in the phone book, and I asked him, where are you? He had 10 years of experience. He's 10 years older than me, he just turned 60. And he was like the oldest man I ever spoke with, and definitely the most experienced architect I ever met in my life. And I realize now, at the time, he's like sort of, he was like 15 years younger than I am today, right? But I asked him, like, where are you? And he was living like a mile away. And I was like, can you come? And he was like, okay. So then he came, and then we sat until 3 o'clock in the morning, and he was just going through all this stuff. But essentially, so I would say, long anecdotal answer. And, you know, and actually sort of we managed, I asked him to come with us to the meeting tomorrow, and it's like, no, I have a job. And I was like, okay, and this is again in 2001. So then he wrote me the next day, because it was a Friday, how did the meeting go? And when you reply to this email. And then I didn't notice, but then below, then he wrote another email that I should reply to. But I replied to the email he wrote me from, and back then, the architecture office he was working on had only one email that came straight to the bosses. So I just replied and said, like, great, you know, when can you start, blah, blah. And then so on Friday evening, Finn gets a phone call from his boss saying, Finn, what did you do yesterday? So I definitely took away his bargaining power for salary discussions. But essentially, I would just say that it is somehow, so there was never any tactic or strategy. I would say the first time we formulated the strategy was after 5 years, because everybody kept saying you should make a vision schedule, whatever. But after 5 years, for the first time, I felt that now that I can remember 5 years, like I can also maybe some way project 5 years. Like so, and I think as an institution and as a person, you have the capability to somehow imagine into the future what you have the ability to remember into the past. Which is why it's scary to turn 50, because then you can somehow see the end of it.
One more, or 2 more.
Do we have one
here we are.
Thank you for coming, and thank you to the organizers for being an open event. My question is a little more technical. So the mindfulness city seems really amazing. But with that, I think there may be a lot of people that would want to move there. And so my question is, if more people want to move there than is at first anticipated, how would it grow without compromising the small footprint or making it too dense to like compromising the nature elements?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. Like, first of all, like, Bhutan is a country with like 800,000 inhabitants, and around 300,000 inhabitants outside Bhutan. 300,000 Bhutanese outside the country. As I mentioned, they're sandwiched between 1.5 billion Indians and 1.5 billion Chinese. The country is the size of Denmark. Denmark is not very densely populated, and we have 6 times the population. The territory is 2,500 square kilometers, and it will remain 80% forest and less than 20% city, where and the framework that we've created would comfortably fit a population like the one of Copenhagen, which is 1 million, which is like more than the population of the country. So a lot of things have to go incredibly well for us to get that challenge. And so in that sense, I don't see Mindful City ever becoming a Mexico City, but it would be amazing if it became a Copenhagen.
Thank you so much again for coming. I just had a quick, more broad question, but do you have any advice you would give looking back to an architecture student who's just starting out?
Yeah, actually, like I think I was blessed. All my teachers at the art academy were from the same architecture studio called Vandkunsten, and they were sort of this hippie architecture studio, mostly doing social housing. But every single professor of mine and teacher, all 6 of them were from that studio. It just so happened. And two little things I picked up on opening day, the introduction day. Penina Poulsen, who's now a partner at Vandkunsten, she, as a way to introduce students to how it is to be an architect, she showed her. She went through her study path, mostly just showing the courses she did and showing the projects she did as part of it, as a kind of lecture. And the one thing I took home from that, the only thing I remember, was that she said that she recommended in your studies to, in a way, try to fall in love. Because you don't have to learn everything, and you don't have to study everything as if everything matters, and no one really. But when something really speaks to you, then really pursue it. Try to dig deep into it. Try to sort of find everything you can about it. And then as you do that, you'll probably spark the next thing. And I will say, in my own case, my path as a student became kind of serial monogamy of falling in love with another architect, and then reading every interview, every article, studying every plan, and finding all the references, all the footnotes, and in a way reverse engineering my own curriculum. And I think that means that you're always studying something that you love or like incredibly curious about, so it never really gets boring. That's one thing. And then the other thing, when then Jens Thomas Arnfred, the founder of the company, he became my professor. It's an art school, the Copenhagen Academy was, so you have professors in the different departments. And he made this welcome speech. There was and he's incredibly eloquent. It says like brilliance and completely lame stuff. Like my favorite is like It doesn't matter what it costs as long as it looks cheap. He said that there was, all these things to learn, all these skills to pick up. He didn't really care about what we decided to pursue, whatever, but he said, you have to promise me at the end of the 5 or 6 years that you're going to be here, you will leave the school with something at heart. That's what you should find or search for, because it doesn't matter what you can do if you don't know what to do with it. So I think when you know what it is, the difference you want to make, or the difference that you're longing for, that again is an incredible propellant to put all the other stuff at work.
I just want to say that thank you for coming all the way here, not from Denmark, but from Brooklyn, and really bringing us to your fantastic world of hedonistic sustainability. And I think we need to save some time for selfies with students. So we have one. Thank you.